For decades, we've all thought of Europe as a soft power, right? It's all about economics, diplomacy, that kind of thing. But today, something completely new is being forged. We're talking about an iron fist. And in this explainer, we're going to break down exactly how Europe is building a military to match its economic might.
I mean, this quote from 1991 is just brutal, isn't it? A military worm. It perfectly captured Europe's problem for so long. It was a velvet glove with absolutely no iron fist inside. It had all the economic power in the world, but it really lacked the muscle to back it up. So what on earth changed?
Well, this slide really gets to the heart of the problem. It shows the sheer inefficiency Europe was dealing with. For decades, its defense budget, when you add it all up, was massive. But here's the crazy part. It was spread across more than 180 different weapon systems. Compare that to the US, which has around 30. The result? Well, you're looking at a military force that was estimated to be only about 10% as effective as America's. Something was clearly deeply broken.
And that reality is what this first section is all about, a glove without a fist. A whole series of geopolitical shocks basically forced Europe to wake up and accept that, in a world of hard power, that soft, velvet glove just wasn't going to be enough to survive.
And the wake-up calls, well, they just kept coming, one after another. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine brought high-intensity war right back to the continent. At the very same time, the US was making it pretty clear that its strategic focus was shifting away from Europe and towards the Pacific. This created what some people call an arc of fire all around Europe's borders, making the need for a self-reliant defense not just a good idea, but absolutely urgent.
So, faced with this brand new, pretty scary reality, Europe needed a new game plan. They developed a new doctrine and they called it strategic autonomy. This was the master plan, the big blueprint for forging that missing iron fist and for the first time really charting its own course in the world.
So what does that actually mean? Well, in simple terms, strategic autonomy is all about Europe standing on its own 2 feet. It's the ability to act alone if it has to, whether that means fighting off a massive cyber attack, intervening in a crisis next door, or even defending its own territory.
And you've got to understand, this isn't just about buying more tanks or recruiting more soldiers. It is a complete overhaul built on 3 critical pillars: actual military power, its own industrial and tech capacity, and finally, the political unity to act as one. It's the power to act, to build, and to decide, all as a single powerful block.
Okay, so that's the big idea. But how do you actually make it happen? I mean, how do you get 27 different countries to pull in the same direction? Well, the engine driving this whole transformation is a framework with a kind of complicated name, but a really powerful mission: PESCO. PESCO stands for Permanent Structured Cooperation. Think of it as the engine room, or maybe even the forge itself, where this new military is being hammered into shape. And this isn't some friendly suggestion box. It's a legally binding pact. 26 nations have signed on the dotted line, committing to pool their resources, coordinate their defense plans, and build military hardware together. The goal is to turn that fragmentation we saw earlier into focused, unified strength.
Now, PESCO isn't just a standalone thing. It's actually the heart of this really smart, powerful ecosystem. Here's how it works. First, an agency called CARD scans all of Europe's militaries to find the gaps. What are we missing? Then, PESCO launches the actual projects to fill those gaps. And finally, the European Defense Fund comes in with the cash, billions of euros, to make it all happen. It's a closed loop designed to build a self-sufficient European defense industry from the ground up.
Now, even though 26 countries are in on this, let's be real. The real power, the real driving force, lies with a core group of about 10 nations. You can think of them as the mastersmiths, the ones providing the money, the technology, and the vision to hammer this new weapon into shape.
And what's really interesting is that these nations aren't all doing the same thing. They've kind of broken down into these distinct groups. You've got your industrial giants, France, Germany, who dominate all the high-tech stuff. Then you have the frontline states, like Poland and Greece, who are laser-focused on deterrence and logistics. And finally, you have the tech specialists, like Sweden and Finland, who bring these crucial niche capabilities, like cyber warfare, to the table.
But the 2 biggest players here, the real heavyweights, France and Germany, well, they don't exactly see eye to eye. France is pushing for total autonomy, a force that can project power anywhere in the world, totally independent of Washington. Germany, on the other hand, is more focused on building an integrated European system, one that also helps strengthen its own industry. And that tension, that rivalry, it's the engine that both drives the whole project forward, but also makes it incredibly complicated.
So, all this talk about plans and frameworks, what is this forge actually producing? Let's take a look at some of the key pieces of that iron fist that are taking shape right now.
These projects are basically the sinews of Europe's new military. First up, you've got military mobility. They're essentially creating a military Schengen zone, so tanks and troops can cross borders just as easily as tourists. Then there's Twister, a project to build a European missile shield against crazy new threats like hypersonic weapons. The Eurodrone is designed to finally end Europe's reliance on American systems for surveillance, and the cyber response teams are building a digital shield for the whole continent.
And what about boots on the ground? Well, that's where the CRO project comes in. It's creating a kind of catalog of forces that can be put together fast to create a 60,000-strong deployment force. The whole point here is to give Europe the power to jump into a crisis on its own doorstep without having to wait for a phone call from Washington.
But, and this is a big but, this iron fist is still glowing red hot in the forge. It is far from finished. In fact, it's an unfinished weapon, and there are some deep cracks and pretty critical questions that still need to be answered.
And maybe the biggest, most fundamental problem is this question. An iron fist, great, but who are you going to punch with it? For countries in Eastern Europe like Poland, the answer is obvious, Russia. But for southern nations like France or Spain, the more immediate threat is terrorism and instability spilling over from Africa. They literally can't agree on which direction the weapon should be pointed.
And it doesn't stop there. There are other really serious structural flaws in the blueprint. For example, Europe's two biggest weapons programs, a next-gen fighter jet and a new tank, are actually being developed outside of the PESCO system. There's a financial Achilles heel, too, since the industry often relies on Wall Street for financing. And a lot of those frontline states, they're terrified that a strong EU army could actually weaken NATO and push the US away for good.
So as Europe follows its strategic compass toward 2030, this is the massive question hanging over everything. The forging has definitely begun, and a new military superpower is slowly taking shape. But whether that power becomes a force for global stability or a weapon that completely changes the world order, well, that's a story that's still being written, and we're all going to see how it ends.